Good afternoon, dear colleagues, and you are warmly welcome to this 20-year anniversary event of Functional Foods Forum at University of Turku. I am Anu Hopia, Professor of Food Development at Functional Foods Forum and also Deputy Director of the unit. Functional Foods Forum, or FFF, like we say, was established in the spring 2002 to strengthen Finland's competitiveness and Finnish know-how on the important linkage of food and health. And from the very beginning, the focus was not only on research, but the aim was also to create active dialogue between different stakeholders like food authorities and industry. And this anniversary seminar program we have built to acknowledge the history of FFF, however, keeping the focus also in the future. And therefore, we will hear about functional foods and healthy foods in general, but also on other food-related challenges that we will face and are facing during the coming decades. And this is a hybrid event. Approximately 1/3 is here present and 2/3 of you are there following us remotely. And for example, we have an active group of high school students over there following this webinar as part of your studies. You are all warmly welcome, both there remotely and here at University of Turku. We hope that you get enthusiastic with science and enjoy the presentations today, but also contribute to the discussion and dialogue with our speakers after each presentation. We will start this event with a recorded welcome words of Jukka Kola, Rector of University of Turku.
Dear audience, Functional Foods Forum, FFF, has reached the age of 20 years. Along the years, the strategic goal of Functional Food Forum has been to be a multidisciplinary and multicultural player that combines academic research with important social impact. Close interdisciplinary cooperation in medicine and food sciences, especially in the field of health and well-being, has been the goal of research and the training of future food and health professionals. Indeed, along the years, these experts have taken their place nationally and internationally in both research and education and in many other activities in society at large. In the early 2000s, health-promoting foods or functional foods were a rising trend worldwide. In Southwest Finland, strong scientific expertise as well as many food innovations in the field made it natural to establish a unit in Turku. Over the years, the perspective on the original health effects of food has been extended to multidisciplinary sensory research closely connected to food and health. Contacts have been established with medicine, but the cooperation with other disciplines such as consumer sciences, food and nutrition sciences, agricultural sciences, and business school sciences has also been strong. In addition to National Research Network, the research in the Functional Foods Forum has led to extensive international cooperation, with a network that extends to Asia and South America, alongside Europe and North America. Microbial research and probiotics have remained as topics of high importance, widening into new and emerging findings also in the forum. Therefore, the University of Turku has for many years been the most cited international probiotic research unit, from which a model was sought in the other regions and continents of the world. Scientific and administrative activities in the European Food Safety Authority have also been of importance, offering the possibility of acting as an expert body, which the Functional Foods Forum initially set up, but also made possible for the university as a whole. The audience. The latest concrete example of the multidisciplinary cooperation of the forum is the establishment of the Flavoria research platform and the startup company Aistila. Flavoria has 4 research facilities: restaurant, cafeteria, multisensory laboratory, and an app. In the lunch restaurant and cafeteria, researchers as well as the restaurant customers can measure food choices, their nutritional profile and bio-waste, and also monitor food and eating experiences. Flavoria is coordinated by the forum and involves several faculties and research centers from both the University of Turku and the University of Helsinki. Flavoria anticipates the properties of food world of the future and responds to the challenges and related upheavals we will face in the areas of food adequacy, safety, and health. The Functional Foods Forum operates in 2 basic home territories, Turku and Seinäjoki. The Seinäjoki unit, led by a research professor, has been expanded to a local food cluster, now covering the needs and expertise of the whole Western Finland and the coast, as well as the Swedish coast, linking the Nordic countries, Finland, Sweden, and Norway together in food and health research. The forum has an extensive international research and teaching network, which will be expanded and diversified, and the forum will continue to be an important research and development unit for nutrition, food, and health and well-being. Taken together, Flavoria and Turku and Seinäjoki units form a part of the national food nutri research infrastructure. Flavoria has also a recognized role in the research infrastructure of the University of Turku. Dear friends, it is clear that health remains to be the main concern in food. However, sustainability and health concerns have long been niche areas of the food and drink sector. Today, when these issues move strongly to the forefront, the Functional Food Forum will have a major role in discovery of efficient health education and promotion of healthy eating and enhancing a healthy planet and population. Hence, I very warmly congratulate the Functional Foods Forum and all people working there for your excellent work of very high impact and visibility. And I thank you all on behalf of the University of Turku. Moreover, I wish you all the best also for the next 20 years and more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jukka, for your kind words. Yes, Functional Foods Forum got its name from, functional foods. The term that had been introduced to food research and food discussion in Japan in 1984, and which had become synonym for foods or food ingredients that have scientifically proven health effect or health benefit. And therefore, it goes without saying that our scientific program starts with a presentation of Marina Heinonen, Professor of Food Safety at the University of Helsinki. Her expertise in the field of functional foods is outstanding, including, among other merits, expert membership at the EFSA, European Food Safety Authority, regarding safety of novel foods. And as Jukka Kola mentioned, also Functional Foods Forum has been active in EFSA. Marina is also a member of Public Health England, which evaluates health claims. And the title of Marina's talk is now Functional Foods with Health Claims. Marina, please.
Thank you, Anu, for your very kind introduction. I would actually like to start with, dear ladies and gentlemen, with congratulating the Functional Foods Forum for all of the work they have been doing in research during the 20 years. And then I would like to also express my gratitude for having this honor to be invited here to talk about what has been happening in the field of functional foods over the 20 years. What I would like to do here is to kind of give you an outline of the 20 years, what has happened in Finland, but also within the whole Europe in this field. And I think we all got very inspired in the late 90s, and the one who actually inspired us most in this area was the protocol that was already from 1991 in Japan, where they had this kind of authorized system where you could apply for a claim on health foods. They called it FOSHU, Foods for Specified Health Uses. And one of the first examples was this so-called probiotic drink from the company Yakult. So we also got very interested in Europe, and one of the first platforms offering discussion and also scientific papers in this issue on functional foods was offered by the International Life Sciences in Europe, and they had a project called Pass Claim. So many of the Finns also participated in the expert work in publishing papers, defining the functional foods, and also talking about the biomarkers, validating the health claim in thinking about different kind of risks. So one of the first papers published in the British Journal of Nutrition regarded the definition of functional food. So in this, the researchers were of the opinion that what is functional, we are looking for some kind of a health effect which is not the same as the nutritional effect. And what was also clear for everybody was that we need to have it satisfactorily demonstrated by science. We also thought that the area of functional foods, it was to bring some economic growth. And as you see from this chart from a UK market, it was really estimated that it will bring us euros in 10 times more compared to the start within a few years. If I give you a summary of what was happening in Finland and then some details in the later pictures. So in the late 90s, we started being very, very active in thinking about research and also the innovation, product development. And in 2001, that was the establishment of the Functional Foods Forum here at the University of Turku, followed by some activities at the University of Helsinki. We had a 5-year professorship in functional foods, and actually we still teach in the area. And then we had a joint effort in having this kind of a PhD course on the functional foods. And where we also have joined our forces is in the evaluation of different health claims, both nationally and also as part of the work what EFSA is doing nowadays. So in the early 2000s, we had a lot of media interest on functional foods, a lot of reports by different parties kind of describing the concept and the prospects. And there were also many product launches by the food business operators. But what I think was also very, very important was that we had research funding available. And you see from the first example on the right-hand side, we had many programs, 4-year programs funded by Tekes, the now called Business Finland. that really stimulated the cooperation between the research and food business operators. Then also the Academy of Finland joined with funding a program of their own. And then also the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry put some money, especially targeted for the berry research. And I think from the kind of a glimpse into the program that we had for the PhD course, we can see how well we actually collaborated in this field. And this collaboration in the educational field, it was under the PhD program when we had this joint national PhD program, ABS, Applied Bioscience. And you see that we learned about the concept, we learned about the consumer expectancy, we also learned about the guidance from the, at that time it was called EVIRA, the Food Safety Authority. We also heard about new research regarding different type of topics like bioactive peptides or satiety or antioxidants or fiber, also probiotics. And we also learned about different types of cases from the food business operators. So no wonder we actually earned a title, Silicon Valley of Functional Foods, because there was so much activity going on in Finland over the years. And one of the reasons behind why we were actually successful was thought to be that we had such a good collaboration between the researchers and the food business operators and also the authorities. But what happened then? We got a regulation from EU, the so-called claims regulation, which is on both nutrition and health claims, and this came into force in July 2007. And of course, the purpose here was to harmonize the market, how to use the health claims, and also that these health claims shouldn't be misleading to the consumer. And what was also important was that it was decided that there was to be one organization, EFSA, the European Food Safety Authority, who should assess all the scientific evidence behind the health claims. So the activities intensified all over the Europe, and all of the member states in the Europe were busily collecting a list on the health claims already on the market, and also adding some wishes that were not yet on the market. And we had a kind of a structured way how to compile these different health claims, and the model came from the Food and Drink Association in Europe. And altogether, actually 44,000 health claims and health claim wishes were submitted to the European Commission. And also in Finland, we were actively submitting 600 different health claims and health claim wishes, but that was actually a small amount in comparison to some other European countries who submitted thousands of claims. But of course, many of these claims were duplicate, the same in different countries, and also there were some claims that were not so clear. So in the end, EU did some restructuring of the claims, and the amount of claims sent to EFSA for assessments of the science was approximately 4,000. And how EFSA went on doing or handling these huge amount of claims that needed to be evaluated for scientific background, they set up these kind of sub-working groups where scientific experts all over Europe, and also maybe some members outside Europe, were invited to take part. And they worked actually for almost 2 years in order to go over for at least a couple of thousand of the claims. And you see how the groups worked per a certain disorder or health challenge. There were groups working on antioxidants, groups working on mental health, or groups working on weight and satiety, and even one group trying to figure out what was behind the botanical claims, mainly identifying the claims. And who was then actually making the decisions in EFSA? all of these sub-working groups, they submitted their opinions to a health claims working group that was established in EFSA. And I'm pleased to say that also the Finns were represented in this working group. So we 3 members, I think, had a very front view of the assessment of the science behind the health claims. So all of these thousands of claims were evaluated, and there were published opinions from this health claims group in the name of EFSA and the NDA, so-called nutrition panel. But in addition to having these 4,000 so-called functional claims to evaluate, there was also a possibility to submit applications. Applications on newly developed science, and also applications that concerned a risk or reduction of a risk of a disease, and also that kind of claims that were targeted for children. And in all of these evaluations, the way how EFSA has been working is kind of a 3-step progress, where first you have to identify what is the food or food ingredient that is responsible for the health claim. It needs to be measurable, and in most cases we would like to know what is the bioactive constituent. And also the claim needs to be beneficial to human health, so something that is functional inside our body, not something like physical, like a shape of a body. And of course, what is most important is that there has to be a cause and effect between the substance and the physiological function. And then you weigh the evidence for the claim. And it also became evident to all of the applicants that you can have a health claim only if it is based on sound scientific data based on human clinical investigations. So if you had some animal studies or some in vitro studies, those could only back up the kind of the mechanistic, the effect, but not fully for the health claim. And there was also a hierarchy between the clinical studies so that the randomized controlled trials would have the most significance. So now we know that we have this joint EU register on the claims, both on nutrition and health claims. And in this register, anybody can search it for the name of the substance, and it does include both the claims that are authorized and those also that are not authorized. And from this example on fiber, you see that the register is really very specific. So we cannot really say that there's a health claim for fiber, because you need to know what fiber and what health function exactly. And what we can also see from this page is that the number of claims that are included in this claims register, it's more than 2,000 already. And it is so that out of these 4,000 functional claims that were sent to EFSA, there is some that, or actually many, that have not yet been evaluated, and there is a reason. And you also see that or maybe you don't see from here, but the case is also that many of the claims that are authorized, they are on the nutrients. There are not that many claims that are authorized on other bioactive substances besides the nutrients. So after this huge work that EFSA experts have been doing, and after also publishing the health claims register, I could say that there are at least 2 big fields in research and also in product development where there was disappointment. And one of the areas is the area of probiotics, because up till now we don't have a health claim on probiotics. And we should also be aware that even the word of probiotics, that already implicates a health claim, because it's about the physiological function. But I believe that we will be hearing more about probiotics in the next presentations. The other sort of disappointment also came to the area of antioxidants, because also here the word antioxidant, it really implicates that there's a physiological function. So if you claim antioxidants, that's also already a health claim. And EFSA defined this antioxidant function very carefully, so that we are not talking about something outside the body, but it really is something that is targeted towards the oxidation of bodily molecules, like fats, LDL, like DNA, like proteins. So those that are antioxidants, proven antioxidants, they are some vitamins and they are some minerals, and then there's one example about hydroxytyrosol in olive oil. At the time, there was a lot of hype about saying that food are a superfood. That we had a lot of superfood around us, but now the word superfood can only be used when you really have the health claim to substantiate the saying. So you cannot really say that any food is superfood. Also, this health claims register, it has become kind of a catalog for looking for suitable claims in product development. And one of the most popular vitamins and minerals are shown here. Add vitamin C, add vitamin D, and you can claim on immune support, for example, or add some mineral like magnesium, and you can claim on almost anything that is said in nutritional literature about magnesium. I think that this idea of having this area of using health claims in marketing, it is good, and it was a good intention in the regulation to think that we need to harmonize the way how we use these claims in marketing, and also keep in mind that we shouldn't be misleading the consumer. But I think there are still two kind of issues that need to be solved. And one of the issues regards the nutrient profiles. Because actually in the regulation, there was this saying that if you want to have a health claim, it should only be on those foods and food ingredients that comply with the nutrient profile. And so far, this has not happened. So even in 2008, in the early days, EFSA published a scientific opinion about the nutrient profiles. And those should have been based on the amount of fat, especially the saturated fat, salt or sugar in the product. And then there would be different categories, different food categories, to kind of make the minimum and maximum limits in order to be able to use the health claim. And for years, nothing has happened. There was a lot of lobbying against having these nutrient profiles, and a lot of discussion how small the different food groups should be in order to have these definitions, definite own nutrient profiles. But now I see, I think it was in January 22 that there was some report from the European Commission taking more action towards this having nutrient profiles. And let's see what we end up having, whether it's something that we are now calling a front of pack labeling of nutrition, if that will be the key to this issue. And the other challenge remaining is this, that we still have around 2,000 health claims on botanical preparations that can be used in marketing, but they have not been authorized by Commission. And this is because the process of evaluating the health claims was stopped because of some opposing from some food business operators especially. And the dispute has been for almost more than 10 years already, whether to actually assess these claims also according to the science, like we have been doing with the regular fruits, or whether we should allow some safe traditional use to be used as the basis of the health claim. And this is something where the discussion has been ongoing, and also there has been some voting between the member states, 50% of the member states opposing the use of the traditional knowledge, and 50% thinking that yes, we should allow this. Why should we allow this? Because it's allowed for some products called traditional herbal medicine. And I took one example about curcumin. So if somebody wants to really dig up the 2000 botanical preparations with the health claims, you can find it from the EFSA webpage, and it's really a long list of different kind of health claims that are, so to say, on the market. But I do think that they are misleading the consumer because there's no science behind it. We even have, with some of these, we even have a negative scientific opinion from EFSA. So this is definitely something that we need to clarify the situation with. But unfortunately, it looks like the Commission is going towards the allowing the basis as the safe traditional use. Not for all of these 2000 herbal preparations, but at least for those preparations where there's already this traditional herbal medicine on the market. So with these words, I would like to once more congratulate the Functional Foods Forum for all the research that you have also initiated here in Finland and also outside Finland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marina, for the really extensive, good historical description of the historical path, 20-year path of this functional foods. Yes, I remember when we were actually both, I think, young researchers who started when this functional foods and food and health topic sort of boosted or boomed up. Are there comments or questions for Marina? There is at least one, two. Yes. You will get a microphone.
Okay, I'm Saska Tuomasykka from Functional Foods Forum. It was nice to hear from your very good presentation to the history of functional foods, Marina. And just one very short question. In your personal opinion, what of those approved functional ingredients, which one of them you see that has had the biggest effect in terms of population health? So which one is the biggest success story?
In terms of population health now?
In terms of population health, of course, you would be first thinking about the kind of diseases that are affecting us at most. And of course, there you would think about things like cardiovascular diseases or metabolic syndrome. And I think in the area of the cardiovascular diseases, I think we've gone more further than already with the metabolic diseases. So I think that these kind of innovations where you could really show that the risk of heart attacks or the risk of diabetes or what else, I think those are the most remarkable. And I think we have also nice Finnish innovations in this field.
Thank you.
Yes, Ingmar Wester from Raisio Group. Thank you very much for your overview. I think it's excellent to look back on the history of European health claim system. I think one question in relation to the nutrition and health claim regulation, as you perfectly stated, that the intention, one of the intention was to standardize the approach within EU. But one other very important that the EU Commission stressed a lot in the beginning was that this health claim, nutritional health claim regulation will foster innovation. And now the question, has this regulation fostered innovation in your mind?
I think that's a very targeted, good question. And when I said that, I also feel that this EU health register is kind of used as a catalog for picking out a health claim or ingredient that is suitable for the health claim. So if you kind of balance how many that kind of products are on the market with that where you really have the real product innovation research behind, I think those are less.
Yes, and then there is a question from the web?
From the chat.
From the chat, yes.
Yeah, we have two questions from the chat, and the first one is, how many claims does EFSA accept per year on average? And maybe we take the second one, how about omega-3?
With omega-3, there are both nutrition claims and there are health claims. I haven't actually calculated that kind of statistics, how many per year. I think, of course, in the early years when we started with the so-called functional claims, according to the Article 13, of course, there were much more claims that were already accepted than if you kind of balance that with the applications. Would this be good as an answer?
And the other was, yeah, did you answer the numbers?
I didn't tell the numbers
Oh,
exactly.
you did not? Okay. Yeah, I was actually also interested in that. What is the frequency, the current frequency of first of all, the flow? How lengthy is the process to get on average? I know that it can be really wide range, but what is the typical? Is there a typical sort of a time frame or process to get a health claim approved? And yeah.
Yeah, there is a set protocol and there's a set amount of time in what time you need to respond. And there's always a deadline for the application. Of course, first it takes a little bit time to validate the application, but then there is it now up to 9 months where you have to give the answer.
Okay.
But in thinking about back to the numbers, if you think that there's more than 2,000 health claims in the register, and it's about a couple of hundreds that are the authorized ones. And this is a work that has been going on for almost 20 years.
And how do you see yourself? Is it and for example, compared internationally, we know that in US they have their own procedure, and for example in Japan they still have that up and running, that procedure. How would you compare European process to?
Good question. So I think the European system is more structured and maybe also more science-based, and I hope that it's also more transparent, that we have one organization with scientific experts making the assessment, in comparison to, for example, the GRAS system in the US, where it is much more easier to get a claim. I would also say that in the Asian countries like the Japan, for sure, the type of science is very different what we have here in the EU.
Do you have a preference yourself?
Of course, I do think that our system is good when we correct those two things that I mentioned in the end.
Okay. Any more comments, questions for Marina? If not, thank you very much, and really impressive and clear. Good start for our seminar. Thank you very much. Yes, and as Marina mentioned, probiotics is one of the foods and food ingredients that are under this umbrella of health promoting foods. And really one of the most, and it is the most intensively studied health promoting foods also in FFF's 20-year-old path. And we have been, in our institute, we have been doing research on probiotics, prebiotics, synbiotics, and most recently also postbiotics. And this research has been led by Professor Seppo Salminen. And now he and his colleague and collaborator from Argentina will lead us to the health benefits of fermented foods. And Seppo Salminen will start this session. Seppo has been a professor at the University of Turku since 1997 and the director of Functional Foods Forum since 2003, so almost from the very beginning. And Seppo is known and awarded internationally for his probiotics research and has been advancing understanding on their implications for human health. And Seppo's publications include over 440 international referred publications and also other type of publications. And now we will hear his insight into the present and future of functional foods. Seppo, please.
Thank you, Anu, for the introduction. And dear friends, dear colleagues, I will try to give you one view on how things have developed and where are they going to. But first, hands up, how many of you know the definition of probiotic? Half. How many of you know the definition of postbiotic? Only a couple of hands. So there's time to step into that world as well. But first I would like to take the Polish challenge. We all think about Professor Metchnikow as the father of probiotics. But this neurologist from Poland actually published 20 years before Metchnikow's time in Polish Medical Journal a diarrhea study where he used the lactobacillus preparation for curing and treating acute diarrhea in infants. So now the Polish people are saying that he is really the true father of probiotics. So let's see how it goes in the future. Is there somebody who even earlier has found this place? Marina started in an excellent presentation on starting from the ILSI Europe and all those happenings. In actual fact, our work here was very much based, and Professor Isolauri, Erika Isolauri, and myself were the experts invited into the ILSI Europe working group, Functional Food Science and Gastrointestinal Physiology and Function. This report from 1998 is one of the 10 highest cited reports in the British Journal of Nutrition, and therefore we were asked to do a commentary. Hopefully within the next couple of weeks we will see the commentary in print, what has happened and where are we going to. And that commentary tells a little bit more details on where we think the future is going to be on this field. So the probiotic definition actually came quite late. There was a lot of work before that, and the interesting thing is, of course, that if you don't have a definition, then you use a lot of undefined components. And I think this is something that we have to consider today, and especially for the future. We debated for years of this idea of live microorganisms with a known dose and benefit to the host, which was defined in a scientific manner, and of course safety. And while we were doing this debate on probiotics, little by little we started understanding that not only live microorganisms are beneficial. So the next part that came out from FAO was the definition of prebiotics. And these are the only definitions that are sort of semi-official. Official would be the Codex definition of yogurt. And in actual fact, in its only vaguely positive approach to probiotics, there is a health claim for yogurt, but yogurt is defined as by Codex rules. So I think this actually demonstrates to us that it's very important to have a common definition that everybody uses and everybody can make use of. And that's why the organization where I have been working for the last 7 years, International Association of Probiotics and Prebiotics, ISAP, has in 15 years ago started this definition, consensus definition setting, and it started by the biotic component. The nature journals define biotic components as the living organisms present in an ecosystem. So the live probiotics came from here. But we also have to think about that probiotics and prebiotics were defined. If you put them together, there is a consensus definition of symbiotics, and most recently, about a year ago, a consensus document, a consensus definition for postbiotics. And it's important to think about this because if you think of yogurt, for instance, there are live bacteria, but there are also bacteria that have died along the storage time or along the processing. Postbiotics are present in all fermented, postbiotic type bacteria are present in all fermented foods. You always have a balance of viable bacteria, non-viable bacteria, and quite often also the prebiotic components in fermented foods. So we have consensus definitions. Each of these four consensus definitions has been published in Nature Reviews in gastroenterology and hepatology. They are all open access, so anybody can upload them or download them anytime. And it's an attempt to have a scientific consensus on each of the definitions, like Codex definition of yogurt. Now, Gabriel Vinderola, who is speaking after me, is currently working on Codex to have a probiotic definition enforced by Codex. And perhaps step by step we will have all these definitions to make life easier for scientists and for other people who use those definitions. And this actually reminds us that the concept of postbiotics is very new, but we do have a lot of human studies. They were gathered into the consensus document, systematic reviews and meta-analysis demonstrating that postbiotic components really do have health effects. Maybe not enough for EFSA yet, but we are on the way there. So regulation and guidelines go together. It's important to remember that we have regulations. They set the type of activities that we do, and the guidelines direct us. EFSA has guidelines for novel foods, EFSA has guidelines for health claims, and they all give us guidance on how to work in science to get there. We also have to remember in terms of probiotics, the novel food regulation. It came into force in 1997. Cut-off date is May 15th, 1997, and it defines novel foods. Quite many of those probiotic, prebiotic, or postbiotic components that we are working with today actually also belong to the novel food group. So it means that we have to have the approval for novel food and then perhaps later on work for the health claims. And the safety assessment is quite strict. It's also very difficult to define safety of live microorganisms. We have here an expert in our audience, Professor Pentti Huovinen. Several discussions we have had together on how to actually assess the safety and how to make sure that live microbes are safe. And it is a really difficult task. It comes out also in the guidelines for novel foods. They are quite vague in terms of live microbes. And that means that we have to find other ways, and postbiotics has been the way for at least some components as now. Guidelines, as Marina already indicated, there are good guidelines from EFSA, very detailed, but quite often they require a lot of work. This is the last guidance document on the novel foods where I was involved myself, and it also gives an idea about the system of collecting safe microorganisms into a catalog called QPS, Qualitative Presumption of Safety, which at the moment to me is the best catalog of safe microbes globally. And I would certainly hope to see that this type of catalog will be recognized by other countries except European Union countries and serve as a basis for future work. Then coming back to the health claim regulation, one of the most often asked questions to me for many years was, where does it say that the probiotic and prebiotic word cannot be used as health claims without health claim assessment? And it took many, many years also to find out that there is one standing committee meeting report where the standing committee of food chain and animal health actually says that probiotic and prebiotic refer to the health benefit. So if you want to use these, they have to be assessed by EFSA. One sentence in a committee report and actually banned the use of probiotic and prebiotic names. And I would suspect that the symbiotic and postbiotic components will have the same fate. But that's just a guess because nobody has evaluated them yet. With Gabriel, we have been working together many, many years now, looking also for the correlation of the selection criteria in vitro and in vivo assays for selecting probiotics. And it's quite clear that they are not very predictive unless you combine them to metadata between the assays. For instance, in animal health, if you look for probiotics, you should have data also on other factors like the use of medical treatments or the growth of animals, and compile that with the in vitro and in vivo assays, and then we can have selection criteria that take into account the health of the host and the types of bacteria included. And of course, we are now going to more and more genomic approaches to identify and predict health-promoting and safety activities of promising probiotic strains. This is a very recent compendium which is useful for checking methods that are currently used. And of course, the last 2 years have started extensive action on probiotics and viruses. This is from a recent issue of journal Nutrients, January this year, listing all the Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium strains that are currently studied for antiviral effects. Antiviral effects by reinforcing our mucosal membranes against the attack of different viruses, and also binding, inactivating some viruses by the cellular structures of these strains. It's an interesting idea because we have more and more studies coming out that include the idea of barrier effect and how to enforce the mucosal barrier. Sometimes the physical barrier might be enough, but sometimes it might be good to also, in addition to the physical barrier, to block the entry of viruses into the mucosal membranes, and at least you can delay the penetration of membranes at this physical process. Also, we have looked at more of the microbiota. Is there a healthy microbiota? In China, for instance, the traditional Chinese medicine suggests probiotic support in viral diseases, and this has been enforced now during the pandemic time. But we don't really have the science support, or if it's available, it might be available in Chinese at the moment. So there's a lot to do. And we have ourselves here in Turku looked at the inactivation of rotaviruses inactivation of some toxins with specific probiotics, and they do work at least in the laboratory conditions, but the clinical studies need to be performed to check what happens later. So how should we build up a healthy barrier then? It starts before we are born. It starts with the mother, with the pregnant mother and the healthy habits during pregnancy. And with the studies that have been conducted here in Turku, we have also been able to demonstrate that nutrition counseling in terms of promoting healthy gut microbiota during pregnancy can be an effective way, and it's even more effective if we have specific probiotics to modulate the gut microbiota. But several steps shape the initial bacterial establishment in our gut, and those factors should be more completely understood than we do today. One factor which we will see probably also an effect after this pandemic time is the depletion of our microbiota. It becomes more and more clear that earlier on we had infants born at home, we had more siblings than today, we had less hygiene and more fermented foods than we have today. And that resulted in good immune response, in good versatile microbiota in the gut. Whilst today most infants are born in hospital settings, sometimes with antibiotic treatments already early on, and very clean housing conditions. So this has led apparently to a depleted microbiome, so the richness, the abundance of different bacteria is quite different from what it was 50 years ago. And this makes us perhaps more vulnerable to different diseases as well. And it's important to remember that we were not meant to be sterile, and breastfeeding is one of the important factors that actually demonstrates that bacteria have always been there, viable bacteria, dead bacteria, and components that promote the growth of certain bacteria during breastfeeding. So I use this idea as saying that breast milk has probiotic type of bacteria. Breastfeeding in general is documented to be healthy, so maybe we could call them probiotic. There are prebiotic oligosaccharides, human milk oligosaccharides, more than 200 of them, and they also reinforce sometimes our microbiota against viruses and against pathogens. Of course, these two combine with the symbiotic idea, and postbiotics, secreted and metabolized components of inanimate microbial cells, they are there too. So in actual fact, breast milk serves as a model for producing food, and also serves as a model of interpreting how mothers' behavior and food intake influences the occurrence of these components in human milk. Another factor that I have tried to clarify, and we have very little information about that, is how many microbes do we get when we eat our normal diet. There are very few studies, and one of the most comprehensive ones comes from California, and they looked at the average American diet focused on TV dinners and convenience foods, the USDA recommended diet emphasizing fruits and vegetables, lean meat, dairy, and whole grains, and a strict vegan diet. And this, to me, was a big surprise when you look at the results. It's a very extensive paper, so I only took the live microbes this time. So USDA meal plan had the highest total amount of microbes, 10 to the power 3 microbes per day if you ate the recommended diet. The American meal plan was 10 to the power 6, so 1,000-fold less. And the vegan diet similarly, because it was also missing dairy ingredients. How can we think about life if you are the average American diet consumer? Year by year, you are exposed to 10,000 to 1,000-fold less bacteria than the recommended diet, I can only suggest that it cannot be without consequences. And it very well fits to the idea of depleted human microbiota. Now that we think about disinfecting all the surroundings during the pandemic time, compiled with this factor, I think our exposure is probably as low as it can be or has been during the existence of mankind. So what are the factors? Of course, genetic factors, factors during pregnancy, mode of delivery, antibiotic treatments, how many, if we looked at the gut microbiota in an article from California for the first year of life for infants, and they were said to be normal. So out of 20 kids, more than 12 had more than 3 times an antibiotic treatment during the first year of life. And the more you repeat it, the more factors there are that change diet and lifestyle. And if it continues, there is a point of no return. And that gives us permanent changes in the gut microbiota and perhaps permanent exposure to factors that facilitate disease processes. So it's important to take into action before the point of no return. If we look at the factors that influence the microbiota development, there are many of them, and they can lead either to healthy status or dysbiotic status. Dysbiosis is a difficult word because it's not explained in detail, and one should always, when you describe dysbiosis, refer to what does it mean in your study case or your research case. But the idea is to build tolerance, build gastrointestinal homeostasis, and have a healthy metabolism in the gut microbiota that we achieve. Now that takes us back to the microbes we eat. If we go back maybe 100 years or a little bit more than 60% of our diet was fermented. So every day it was providing us different live microbes, different types of microbes that have built up a beneficial system in our gut microbiota. Diverse fermentation products, and that seems to be the action now. The European Union is funding studies on fermented foods and favorably plant-based fermented foods, and trying to increase the idea of having a different outcome by modulating the gut microbiota with fermented foods. There are some studies, this is from a publication of Professor Marco and co-workers from California. Again, they have been looking at different types of diets, and the early human diet was certainly rich in microbes, high microbial numbers. Now it's low microbial numbers in our diet, and perhaps it should be added microbial numbers with different fermented products, dairy or plant-based. Very few studies have been published. There are a couple of dietary interventions on fermented foods, and clearly fermented foods affect gut microbiome and also the immune profiles. They decrease the inflammatory cytokines and immune cell signaling and increase the diversity of gut microbiota. Markers that actually favor healthy diets and healthy foods. And this appeared to be much more often than with the high fiber diet. So high fiber plus fermented foods is probably the way to go. And as we see now, the favor is on plant-based products. I took the liberty, and these are pictures from Gabriel Vinderola. Fermented foods can be also healthy, but gastronomical differences are there. Gabriel gave me the idea of a couple of restaurants, one in Buenos Aires, one in Santa Fe, and I have had the pleasure of consuming a whole evening dinner, everything fermented there, and it can be a gastronomical surprise in a pleasant way. So it doesn't need to be sauerkraut. And of course, also things like kombucha. It's actually not a standardized product, so every product is different. And it could be a way of increasing the gut microbiota diversity. Now, postbiotics. Before we go to there, we have to look at the safety assessment again. Many of them are novel foods. Many new microbes have been introduced, and they are not in the QPS list. So regulatory assessment has been much easier for postbiotics because then we don't have to worry about infections. And that's why we see an increase in postbiotic studies coming out. For instance, our Japanese colleagues tell that they have 30 years of experience of postbiotics and more than 50 products on the market at the moment. And some of those are also intended for Europe. So Japanese people have been really forerunners in the non-viable microbe business. We have two that have been accepted by EFSA, the Bacteroides xylanisolvens and Akkermansia mucinifila, and probably both of them are on their way to health claim applications as well. If we look at this list, it also gives you an idea that quite different bacteria are being introduced or are being studied to be introduced into our food supply in the future. So what is the future of biotics for microbiota modulation? More target-specific novel microbes for clinical use? Yes. There will be target disease-specific microbes. And current biotics for general use. More fermented foods with different starter cultures, and specific fermentates, for instance, for infant formula. How many of you have realized that France has a long history of fermented infant formula? Long history and safe use. And I also added here nutrition economic evaluation of biotics. I saw Aki walking in, and he's one of those persons who will be responsible for nutrition economic evaluation in the future. And of course, at the end, not to forget culinary specialities. Summa summarum, microbiota modulation and biotics is offering us much more opportunities than before. In food supplements, in foods, in diet counseling, and in also a multi-component biotic diet. I added there that science progresses faster than regulators. Regulators are getting better, but science is always a little bit step ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Seppo. Thank you very much, Seppo, for the. I think I also liked your last statement. Would it be okay if we take Gabriel's presentation first, and then we have sort of a sum up of this session? So we have sort of a joint discussion.
Yes.
So our second speaker of this fermentation session comes from our long-term collaborator, Professor Gabriel Vinderola, from National University of Litoral, Santa Fe, Argentina, where he is also principal researcher at the Dairy Product Institute. Gabriel is a multidisciplinary researcher with over 20 years of experience in the field of food microbiology, specialized in lactic acid and probiotic bacteria and intestinal microbiota. He's an active public science communicator in Argentina and has worked alongside academic and industrial scientists and regulators, both in Europe and in South America. Gabriel is also a dedicated science popularizer and communicator. For example, in Instagram, he has more than 70,000 followers. And now we will hear Gabriel's recorded presentation of fermented foods today and in the future. And after this recorded presentation, Gabriel will be present online and available for the discussion and questions. So Gabriel, please.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Gabriel Vinderola. I'm researcher and professor at the National University of Litoral in Santa Fe, Argentina. I'm really happy to be part of the celebration of the 20th anniversary of the Functional Food Forum, a place that I had the chance to visit in several times. And it's a place like I feel like home, so it's that I'm doubly happy for this. I will be giving you a perspective on fermented foods today and in the future. We are fortunately leaving behind a pandemic, 2 years pandemic, where a lot of attention has been placed in our microbiome, in the microbes that inhabit our gut or our respiratory tract, and that they behave as a barrier against bacteria, viruses, and other food challenges, and how good it is to have a diverse and abundant microbiome to be protected and to have someone to instruct our immune system. So the gut microbiome took like a really a place of importance during this pandemic. Also, there were are some articles that caught my attention, like this one that related the consumption of fermented vegetables like sauerkraut and the incidence of the disease. The country that had the highest consumption of fermented vegetables were less affected by the pandemic. Of course, this is an association study, but maybe it's telling us something that the microbes can have a role in protecting us. And also people that had long-term COVID, that it took several months to recover, they have like a persistent dysbiosis, the diminution and in diversity in abundance was not recovered in 6 months following this infection. And so, of course, there were many hypotheses how beneficial microbes like probiotics or microbes that you can find in fermented foods could be a tool to recover that microbiome. Of course, we will face new pandemics, so I think this area will gain a lot of interest and importance in the future. But don't go too much into the future. Let's take a look in the past and how fermented milks were part of our evolution of our culture. And this is the case of fermented dairy product, and this is what is called the dairy diaspora. Fermented milks were born in the Middle East, and gradually they were taken north by people that were conquering new territories, and of course, reaching the Nordic countries where we have what we call a lactase hotspot. That is, many people is tolerant to lactase when they are older, and this explains the high rate of intake of fermented foods. But what is a fermented food? And for this, we have the International Scientific Association of Probiotics and Prebiotics, a very well-reputed institution from which Professor Seppo Salminen was president in the past. And they define fermented foods like foods made through desired microbial growth and enzymatic conversion of food components. Here, I think what is most important is the fact that the process should be controlled to have fermentation and not to have spoilage. What is fermentation? Fermentation takes the food to a unique place between raw and cook. The taste, the flavor that you can have through fermentation cannot be achieved by other way of food processing. Fermentation is cooking without fire. It will diminish the content of anti-nutrients, it will enhance digestibility, will confer the foods a high population of leaf microbes, but also metabolites, will increase, of course, shelf life, will confer microbial safety due to the acetic acid, lactic acid, or other antimicrobial compounds that can be produced during fermentation. Of course, as we said, it will confer unique flavor, texture, and taste, and potentially health benefits. This is maybe one of the most searched projects in the world to find out what fermented foods can do in our health. If you think in fermentation, I think we should be very thankful to lactic acid bacteria, to yeast that produce all this kind of very tasteful food, where control makes the difference. Here you have the same product. You can say a cheese and the same microbe, Penicillium roqueforti. And if you control conditions, you can have a desirable fermentation and you can have a Roquefort cheese. But if you cannot control conditions, you will have spoiled cheese, something that is not good for eating. So control makes the difference between fermentation and food spoilage. But what is the limit? What is the limit between something that is fermented and something that is spoiled? And this is the case of a pear that is served as a dessert in a restaurant in Spain, where the people in charge of the kitchen, they have also a laboratory next to the kitchen where they can verify that the malt used to ferment this beer does not produce mycotoxins. So the limit between fermentation and spoilage is, of course, safety. Safety first before something can be eaten. What I think would be the future directions in fermented foods? I think researchers are very interested in trying to find if there is a core of microbes that are responsible for the health benefits, mainly in those fermented foods that are different from batch to batch. For example, kefir, kombucha, kimchi, sauerkraut, where you have spontaneous fermentation and microbes, they will be different from one batch to the other. So how reproducible can be those health benefits? The concept of citizen science was born in Belgium. I will tell you a little bit more, but it's very interesting because you can collect from a real setting a lot of data about fermented foods. And what will be the role of fermented foods in dietary guidelines or at home or in restaurants? So coming back to the issue of core, of if there is a core of microbes, when you collect sample of kefir from different places, you will see that the composition of lactic acid bacteria or yeast are different from different kefir. And of course, they will change, this composition will change along back sloping. You know that you use the same kefir grains to ferment again and again and again. And what can happen is the bacteria, there are some bacteria that may remain in all fermentation, some yeast that can be present again in all fermentation, but there are some bacteria that will disappear while some other bacteria will appear, and the same for yeast. So you have a microbial community that changes along fermentation. So how reproducible are the health benefits of kefir or of kimchi, of any other fermented foods that has not precise microbial composition? And this is the case. The 3 clinical studies were conducted with kefir, with different kefir, taking a look to the effect in bowel movement, in constipation. In one study, it was effective in 3 out of 11 patients. In the next study, there were no significant difference between people that eat kefir or did not drink kefir. And in the last study, there was an increase in evacuatory frequency. So you have the same kefir with different effect, but in fact, it's not the same kefir. You call kefir, but you have different microbial composition. So are you able to say, okay, kefir will have this effect if you cannot reproduce from batch to batch? But let's see what's happened in another food. This is food produced by the fermentation of vegetables, like sauerkraut, that you use cabbage, or a kimchi, that you use a special kind of vegetable. And of course, if you have 3 different batches of sauerkraut, they will have different microbes, and this composition will change along fermentation. So you don't have the same microbes at the same time. And in this study, these are 3 studies conducted with kimchi in overweight women, and they took a look what happened in the in the parameters of the metabolic syndromes. These studies were conducted in different years. Of course, different kimchi were used, but in all cases, they saw that kefir consumption in overweight women, they had a positive effect on metabolic syndrome. So here we may think that there is a core of microbes that are behind these health benefits. The concept of citizen science, this was born in Belgium by the group of Professor Sarah Lebir, also part of ISAP, where they prepare a simple protocol for people to prepare fermented carrots at home. Many people produce in a real setting at their places, and they send samples from these fermented carrots to see how different are the microbial population in this fermented food. So this is really interesting because common people is participating in this big design experiment, contributing to the knowledge about the microbes they have in the fermented foods. And now let's take a look to this concept of recommended daily allowance of leaf microbes. In nutrition, you know, we have a recommendation for a daily intake of calcium, or magnesium, or certain vitamins, and it started the discussion if we need a given amount of leaf microbes every day in our food. This is a really nice area for nutrition because we can see that we can expect that this will end up in the dietary guidelines, following the concept that in the past, in the what we can call the early human diet, we were exposed to many microbes, and these microbes were in communication with our immune system, keeping the immune system active. But then when we went to a more Western diet, deprived of microbes, this communication was lost between the microbes and the immune system because we have very few microbes in our diet. So if we increase our intake of fermented foods, we can recover some of these microbes and we can recover that communication with our immune system, so being better prepared for different challenges that come through our diet. It expected that a study will be published soon about a system that this study was conducted with people in the US. Is a classification system for defining and estimating dietary intake of leaf microbes. This is an ISAB-funded initiative, and it will certainly give some clarity about what are the minimum amount of leaf microbes that we need to have this improvement in our immune system. And last year, we presented with Professor Seppo Salminen a project that, if we are lucky and if we get the funding, it will be performed at Flavoria, where the students or the people that eat every day there will be offered different fermented foods, like yogurt, sour milk, villi, fermented oats, sauerkraut, kimchi, and people then we will be able to see what are the preference and what are the amount of leaf and dead microbes that people ingest while getting these fermented foods. And finally, I wanted to show some pictures of what is happening, at least here in Argentina, in relation to fermented foods from different chefs that they are making their first steps. Some of them are really experienced in incorporating fermented foods in their dishes. For example, here you can see kimchi. Here, this is really interesting. This is the Weingart, the mother of the Weingart. It was washed and it was placed on a frozen yogurt. All the dishes you can see here, they contain some fermented food. This is from a fermented restaurant that they offer fermented foods here in Santa Fe. And this is another case in Buenos Aires, where all you can see has something that was fermented. So fermentation is getting little by little in many restaurants to offer new taste, new texture, new flavors that are unique, of course, and that cannot be obtained with other methods. So sometimes home messages. The COVID pandemic focused our attention on the microbes that colonize our body and the possibility of using beneficial microbes to promote our microbiome and, of course, to stimulate the immune system. And unfortunately, new pandemic or different seasonal respiratory infections will come. So maybe if we are more aware about the potential of fermented foods and if we develop proper science, maybe some recommendations can be made to be better prepared to face this infection through these particular functional foods that are fermented foods. But of course, there are many challenges for the future. One is to determine if there is a core of beneficial microbes that constitute the signature of a fermented food. What are the microbes that characterize a kimchi, a sauerkraut, a kefir, and if they are reproducible? And of course, if this core of microbes is responsible for the health benefits, if we need a RDA of leaf microbes, if the dietary guidelines will say in the future that we need leaf microbes as other nutrients, Of course, this will depend on the approach of each country. How to produce safe and functional food, fermented foods at home. I think this will come from those projects like Citizen Science that is taking place in Belgium, on how to promote the intake in the new generations. The Functional Food Forum is celebrating this year its 20th anniversary, and functional food has been a significant part of their interest. Significant contributions were made from the Functional Food Forum to this very exciting field, and I'm sure that very significant contribution will be made in the future. So, happy birthday. Thank you, gracias, and quitos.
Okay, yes, I just heard that there's problems to get connection with Gabriel to Argentina, but let's continue a few questions with Seppo. So yeah, there is at least Pentti is having question, and then from the audience, from the chat, there will be questions too.
Thank you, Seppo and Gabriel, for excellent presentations. I am Pentti Huovinen, Professor of Bacteriology in University of Turku. My question is short to Seppo. Now I am a field of medicine and medical doctor. How you see that the bacteria will be used as medicines, not as a food ingredient?
Well, I would say that first of all, they would not be perhaps used as medicines, but adjuvants to medicines. Adjuvants to medical therapy. And we do have actually, European Society Pediatric Gastroenterology and Nutrition has recommendations for probiotic use. There are 3 different use areas with specific probiotics. The US Gastroenterology Society has recommendations. So there are emerging recommendations which are not for the food field, but more the medical use of bacteria. And I believe that we will see more of them now that we have things like Akkermansia or Bacteroides in the probiotic area.
Thank you. And then there are comment from the chat.
Yeah, I'll take 2 questions at a time. And the first one is, how do you see the future of fermented food?
I think at the moment the future of fermented foods is very good. The idea is, and we both emphasized it, Gabriel and myself, that we need to have something else. People think of sauerkraut, and you either love or hate it. But as you see from the pictures from different restaurants, it can be also a culinary delight. And I'm personally a friend of asparagus, and I was thrilled to actually eat fermented asparagus.
Wonderful. I think the next one is really exciting for many of us who are vegans. How would you say vegans could increase the microbial intake in their daily diet?
They could double or triple it by using fermented foods, but it really depends on if you completely close away dairy foods, fermented dairy foods. That's for us in Europe the biggest area of microbe intake. If you completely forget that, then it starts being challenging. As you saw the American study, the strict vegans, they are quite low in microbial intake.
Wonderful. So we have like 3 questions left here in the chat at the moment, but I will take the first one and then take a break and leave the word for you guys there. In the study with the US diet, does high number of microbes also reflect the balanced microbiome which is needed for the resilient microbiome?
Yes, you need a balance, and if you don't have the bacteria, you don't have the balance either. And the important thing is actually what we are missing here in the US. Everything is calculated on a cost-benefit basis. And really, they do a lot of this nutrition economics type of studies. And if there is a benefit in dollars, it will be taken over.
Yes, and then there are questions from the...
Hi, thank you for your presentations. I'm Sulo Roukka I'm a doctoral student at the University of Helsinki, and I was wondering the way we cook food and how we consume these probiotic or fermented foods. Does it matter dead or alive? And should we focus on that aspect as well when we consume these kind of food products?
It's a very challenging question, of course. I think it depends really on what is your target. In some cases you need the viable bacteria, in some cases it doesn't matter. But the problem here is that we know too little of the postbiotic, the non-viable bacteria and their impact still. So it's an emerging area, and if I was starting my studies today, I would certainly start from that end.
All right. Then we have a question. Should we tailor-made according to region or environmental conditions?
I think that's an excellent question, because we have learned that whether you look at gut microbiota or whether you look at breast milk microbiota, it varies depending on the geographic region. There are sort of all-purpose, like the current probiotic products. They are more or less all-purpose, trying to enforce our intestinal microbiota, but especially in the disease-specific areas, the geographic region will form one basis that we have to consider and perhaps have a different type of preparation. Anyway, today we have always, most often we have worked on single strains. I think the future is for multiple strains and more personalized design for the products.
Thank you. There is a question from audience.
Yes, Sigmar Wester from Raisio once again. Thank you very much for an excellent presentation, and I would like to go back to the early days or early years of the life. I think your presentation was very excellent, but I think my question relates to a family with pets or not, and its impact on immune health early and later in life, and also perhaps then, does pet or not in your family have an impact on gut microbiota, and does it matter what type of pet it is, if there is an impact?
Actually, it's a series of questions together, but challenging to answer. We have one study where we have shown here in Turku that if you have a pet in the family and a child and the pet, they interact and there is an interchange of microbes. We can even see, and we have here the person who is part of a study team, Carlos Gomez, is along here today. So feel free to ask questions during the coffee break. But basically, if we give a dog a probiotic, we will see the probiotic type of bacteria also in the infant. So there is a close contact between especially infants and pets. I would assume that similar results could be obtained if there was a cat in the family, but that has, to my knowledge, not been studied yet.
Or guinea pigs or others.
Seppo, you were saying that earlier we ate much more fermented food products, and then now again it's rising again. How do you see personally, what are the dips and ups and downs? Why? And how do you see the dips and ups and downs in the future?
I think we have Gabriel online now. He could also answer this question.
Yes, do
right?
we have Gabriel also to the big screen?
Hello, everyone. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hi.
Good to see you here. But now we want to have you also onto the big screen here. Probably in the web you are. Well, yes, there. Please go ahead, Gabriel.
Yeah. According to this new interesting fermented foods, I think we owe a lot to the pandemic. People, we learned many things in the pandemic. We learned how to ferment at home, but we also learned that we need more microbes in our gut. Because if we have more microbes and more diversity in our gut,
our immune system is better prepared. Not only the gut immune system, but the respiratory immune system. So I think this pandemic gave us a lesson that we are losing our microbes. Our immune system is weaker. We will have new pandemics, new respiratory infections. So I think that people start looking at the food as a way to improve their health, to improve their immunity. And here is where fermented foods, they have a very important role. So maybe they were rediscovered, and even in science, there was an association study showing that countries that consume more fermented vegetables, they had less infections of COVID. So this is an association, but I think that really makes sense. If we have more microbes, our immune system works better, and we are better prepared to face these infections.
Thank you. It would be really great to continue this discussion, but I'm afraid people are now probably waiting for the coffee, and we will at least here continue discussion over the coffee. We will have approximately 30 minutes coffee break. And thank you once more, Gabriel. It has been a delight to have you here also like this in a via Zoom or what is it now this connection, but hope to see you here also soon again, personally.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Seppo. Thank you, Anu, for all you've did for the Functional Food Forum. This is really an honor. And have a nice meeting, a hybrid meeting, and have a nice coffee there.
We will. Thank you. Thank you very much.